What is going on, Reality Pop Nation? Thank you for tuning into the Reality Pop Network. Pooji is back with your Week 6 Big Brother recap on Reality Pop, presented by The Block. Thank you for being here. Be here every Thursday night to recap Big Brother, and what a week we have to recap. An incredible week of Big Brother, and the game is really off and running. The teams are out the window. Players are playing on their own, in their own alliances, and things are just insane right now. And let's start off with episode 17. Sorry I'm a little bit late this evening. Typically, these start around 9:10, 9:15, a little bit later than normal. So if you're a late night YouTube watcher, thank you for being here. Let me know your comments. Feel free to comment in the comment section, and I'll try and answer any questions you might have on this live episode of The Block, recapping Week 6 again. But Week 6 started crazy on Sunday. We go back to Sunday with the head of household competition, where you had to go back and forth with music being played. It was a 1v1 competition. We love these competitions on Big Brother because they really start to draw some lines in the sand. Who's going to pick who to compete against one another? That's where it really begins in Big Brother. And Name That Croon was a game where they would play a song, a jazz-themed song that would maybe tip off the house guests as to what the competition is that they're talking about. Long story short, the competition goes on. It is what it is, and it comes down to Kyland and Tiffany at the very end, and Tiffany really wants to win this competition, and quite frankly, from the very beginning, Kyland said he was trying to throw the competition. He didn't even care to win this competition. Comes down to Kyland and Tiffany. Kyland is clearly throwing it to Tiffany. At this point, we think, okay, maybe Kyland just doesn't like any of this power at all. So that's an interesting sidebar conversation that we can have. So Kyland throws it to Tiffany. Tiffany picks the wrong answer. She had it in the bag. I guess the only difference would have been if Kyland purposely picked the wrong answer, then Tiffany would have won. Maybe that would have been his best bet. Just throw the competition, pick the wrong answer. Don't even give Tiffany a chance to pick the wrong answer. They sat there for felt like 5 minutes just waiting for someone to make a move. I'm sure it was only like 30 seconds. But to us watching on TV, it felt like forever. Well, Kyland ends up becoming the HOH as Tiffany gets the answer incorrect. Kyland, in a week that he did not want to win HOH, is now the HOH. So he is rattled, his brain is scattered, and things get crazy here because, he's in the Cookout Alliance with 5 others in the house, and there's obvious targets in the house to go after. Interesting point at this point, no one is talking about Derek X after making a huge move as HOH to get rid of Christian. So Derek X, nowhere to be found in this whole conversation of who potential targets are going to be. At the end of the day, it seems like Kyland has it narrowed down to Alyssa, Brittany, and Claire. So Alyssa, Brittany, and Claire seem to be the targets. That's kind of what looks like it's going to happen. Claire's going to go up with Brittany. Alyssa's going to be the replacement nom if anything happens. Cookout stays together. Well, Derek F., Big D, steps in. He cannot see Brittany go on the block for a 4th time. He cannot see this happen. She would be devastated. She does not want to see this happen. So what does Big D do? He reaches deep down in his heart, goes into his emotions, and he decides, you know what, I'm going to go up as a pawn. I'm going to do this thing, and I'm going to lay on the sword for Brittany. And what do we know about Big Brother? Expect the unexpected, and typically pawns go home. Well, in this case, we have to wait and see what happens with Big D. He starts to get a little paranoid as well. He put on a really, really good face, though, trying to act like he was actually upset at Kyland, not letting the house guests know that this was all a facade, this was all a plan. So Derek F. and Claire are up for eviction. Now, we had a great twist entered into the house, the High Rollers Room. We talked about it last week when Jacob was on the episode of The Block. But the High Rollers Room is a twist where house guests get the opportunity to compete in little mini games in a separate room, and they have the opportunity to win different advantages in the house. So America votes. Top 3 vote getters get 100 Big Brother bucks, BB bucks they're calling it. Next 3 get 75. The following house guests get 50. So we go into the High Rollers Room, and there is the Veto Derby. Now, the Veto Derby, an interesting twist. You're going to have to follow me on this one. It's worth $50 to compete, and what you had to do in this one was slide these mint juleps down a shuffleboard, bar shuffleboard looking board. Whoever had the most points won, and so on from there. That was it. There's also the chopping block roulette, where the winning house guest can remove a nominee and a new replacement goes up at random by spinning a wheel. And then the last and least, but not least, competition is the Coin of Destiny. A house guest can anonymously overthrow the current head of household by correctly calling a coin toss. Simple as that, 250 Big Brother bucks. So this one was the Veto Derby. 4 house guests competed in it. Kyland ends up winning, and he ends up betting on Alyssa to then win the veto once the veto nominations are set. The veto contestants are set, So Kyland bets on Alyssa to win. If Alyssa wins, Kyland gets a second veto for himself to use, along with Alyssa's. Claire ends up betting on Kyland, and that's important for a few reasons. Claire bets on Kyland, thinking Kyland wants to maybe keep noms the same, so I'm going to keep the veto for myself. Well, if Kyland wins, Claire is on the block. She also gets one. So now it's almost in Kyland's benefit not to win the power of veto, because now he is giving his target, Claire, the opportunity to also win a veto and take herself off the block. So we get down. It's the greatest veto competition of all time, veto backwards. Otev, the greatest veto comp. We love watching Otev. It's so much fun to watch, so messy, so slippery. Big D almost broke his legs. People were hitting their faces on the ramps. Ozzy may have broke her nose. Not really, but it looked like it. Stuff was crazy. I mean, it was madhouse out there, and it's got to be one of the most physically demanding competitions, having to pull yourself up this ramp to get back to Otev and kneel down and present your prize to Otev. And in this case, it was Otev's jellyfish jelly jam, whatever it was called. They had to find jellies with house guests named on it that kind of identified evicted house guests, who got evicted on this day, who was evicted on the Queens, who, and so on and so forth. You get where I'm going with this. So the competition starts. The 6 house guests are ready to go, rearing up for it, and it gets down to the final 2. It was an exciting competition, and it comes down to Kyland versus Alyssa. Well, at this point, since Kyland had already bet on Alyssa to win this competition, he was guaranteed a veto no matter what. He thought it was in his best interest to let Alyssa win. That way he could win a veto and make it look like he pulled Claire off the block by his own power, rather than winning and letting Claire pull herself off the block, which I think is a great move. What's not a great move is throwing a competition as poorly as he threw a competition. I mean, the way he threw this competition was so embarrassing. It was so lackadaisical. You could tell from the very beginning of this competition, or from the final round, Kyland was not in it to begin with. Kyland did not care. Kyland didn't want to win the final round. He had already calculated in his head how he saw this final round going, and much to his benefit, Alyssa ends up winning. Kyland goes home with the second veto from winning the veto derby, and there we go into the veto ceremony. And now Big Brother doing some interesting twists for us, not really revealing the veto ceremony until Thursday's episode. But let's get to Wednesday's episode real quick. Episode 18. We just talked about Otev. The whole situation's going on. Claire recognizes that Kyland is not competing in the final round, and Claire thinks Kyland doesn't want her off the block. Claire thinks if Kyland wanted me off the block, he would win this so that I could pull myself off. Little did she know, Kyland wanted to win the veto himself. That way he could take her off the block and get a little bit of brownie points there. Claire, I think, saw right through that. So things are going crazy. The veto ceremony happens, and pretty much tempers start to get wild. Before we get to the veto ceremony, Kyland approaches Sarah Beth with which I'm sensing a trend in Big Brother where before players make big moves, we saw it with Derek X trying to talk to Alyssa about getting Christian out. Before players make big moves, it's almost like they feel guilty and they want to tell somebody about it. Well, here's the deal. 1, that's stupid. And 2, don't go and tell the biggest supporter or the biggest, ally of that house guest that you're doing it to. Derek X should have never told Alyssa. It didn't make a difference. Christian still went home. It is what it is. He didn't really save face. But Kyland approaches Sarah Beth and says, hey, I think it'd be best if you went up and talked to Brittany and let her know she might be a replacement nominee. First of all, Kyland, sack up and tell her yourself. Don't put Sarah Beth out there to do your own work. Excuse any language I use, but don't let Sarah Beth go out there and do your dirty work for you. How about you go out there and do it yourself and face the music? You're going to have to make tough decisions in this game, And one of those is putting up an emotional Brittany. We've all seen Brittany this entire season. We know how she is. We know she's emotional. We know that she doesn't like being on the block, and she feels like she's being picked on. Poor Brittany. She's not realizing it's a game. I guess if I was in the house and I was on the block 3 or 4 times, I'd be frustrated too. But I think at the end of the day, she's just a nice player that not many people identified as being a strong player to take to the end or to align with, as she's only won one competition. I think she won the veto competition to pull herself off the block, but she isn't really a strong competitor in the sense of she's going to be a comp beast in the HOH competition. She doesn't have the strongest social game going for her, and that is what it is. That's who she is. She was a great player, a nice player to have in this house, and I think that's what a lot of people identified her as. Excuse me, a lot of talking going on here for Pooji. I apologize about that. So it gets down to it, and they're on the block. Everything's going crazy. The house guest, Sarah Beth, goes out and talks to Brittany. Brittany blows a gasket like a little teapot, ready to boil over, ready to whistle. She goes and finds Kyland right before the veto ceremony and tries to get in his ear. And what we find out is Kyland and Brittany had a deal in place that would kind of keep both of them safe for at least 2 weeks. And Kylan agreed to that deal. He was assertive about that deal. He was strong in that deal. It seemed like a deal he was legitimately in for. Us on the outside, we know that's not the case. We know he's got the Cookout Alliance. That's his main group. We know he has Sarah Beth in his back pocket. That's his little showmance thing going on there in the house. So we know that there's a lot going on with Kylan and other people. The alliance with Brittany was never really anything we thought it was going to be. So it is what it is. Brittany ends up, Kyland ends up taking Claire off the block. Alyssa ends up not using the actual veto. So it ends up being Derek F. and Brittany on the block. So Derek F. is now pissed off because he didn't want to be a pawn sitting next to another joker. And it was either, Azza, who wasn't going up because she's with the Cookout, or Brittany. Alyssa wins the veto. She is no longer an option to go up on the block. So Kylan really had no choice. It was take a shot at Derek X, which I don't think was going to work. That's what some people had pitched to him, but Derek X seems a little bit safe in this game right now. Obviously, he's a beast, and I think he's got great shot at winning this game. But he ends up putting Brittany up for the 4th time, so there's poor Brittany, goes back up on the block next to one of her closest friends in the house, Derek F. So it's just an emotional roller coaster for Brittany. She goes berserko mode after the nomination ceremony, crying, bawling her eyes out. She can't stand it. She's crying to Azza and Big D. They're trying to hold her together, and things are just getting insane. So this all happens. The upset, she gets upset, and Claire and Derek X, after this, start to discuss what might be best for their games in the house. And here's what's interesting about this. If the Cookout Alliance is ever going to get found out, it's from this type of situation right here, where the logical move is to get rid of one of the Cookout members, but the Cookout members don't buy into it. So here's what kind of happened. Derek X and Claire kind of identified Big D as that fun-loving guy in the house that anyone can really take to the end. No one's really ever going to take a shot at Big D. He's one of those guys you can put on the block and the other person's almost always going to go home. And Brittany, on the other hand, was a person that if they saved would likely align with them and become a third member of their mini alliance. I don't even want to say alliance, but would become an extra vote in their favor, would become an extra contestant in their favor if they wanted to take a shot at Xavier or Kylan down the road. Brittany would be there. So Derek X pitches this to Hannah, who's in the Cookout Alliance. Derek X doesn't know that. Claire talks about it with Tiffany. So Hannah and Tiffany, their red flags are going off. They're going crazy. They're like, we got to stop this right now, or else they're going to become our targets next week, the following week, and so on if they keep trying to take out some of the Cookout members. So Claire and Derek X are so gung-ho about this plan to get rid of Big D. And they're pitching it to Hannah, they're pitching it to Tiffany, and they're making very valid points. In fact, Hannah and Tiffany even go on the diary room where they do the little monologues during the episode and say, this is extremely tough to turn this opportunity down because they're making extremely valid points. Now, if I'm Claire and Derek X in my shoes, red flags have to be going off, thinking, this makes complete sense to get rid of Big D right now. Why aren't you guys buying into it? You have to start thinking, okay, if you're not buying into the logical move in the game, there's got to be other stuff going on. And I'm sure they think that. I'm sure they're not dumb. Obviously, they're not dumb. Derek X has been one of the smartest players in the game. We'll get to that as well. things get crazy in this situation. So the hype around Big D kind of dies down a little bit. You're looking at the votes. You kind of have 4 votes in favor of the cookout, 4 votes not in favor of the cookout. Kyland being the HOH, he was going to vote for Brittany to go home. He was going to save Big D. He wasn't going to have Big D go home as a pawn on his watch. And Brittany felt very betrayed by Kyland. She felt very taken advantage of. She even, in fact, well, I won't get to that yet. I won't spoil anything. So we get to the vote. The vote ends up coming in, and all that suspense, all that surprise, all that filler that we were ready for, that we were excited for, we're going to get a split vote. It's going to be 4-4. Is Hannah going to vote out Derek F? Is she going to flip on the cookout? Is this the moment when the big move happens? And unfortunately not. It does not happen. I mean, I say that not that I'm a Big D hater, not that I'm a Brittany lover. I don't care about that. I just want big moves to happen. I want crazy stuff going on. I think it would be awesome to see some of that happening in this season. And we've had a great season. We've had a great season of Big Brother. I think this is one of the best cast seasons of Big Brother, and I think that's not really anything crazy to say. I think this is one of the best seasons in recent memory. I love the newcomers, but I need some big moves to happen. I need things to happen that get me excited. And there are a lot going on. There's a lot going on that is getting me excited. But ultimately, the vote happens, and Brittany gets evicted on day 44 of Big Brother at a vote of 7-1, with the one vote against Big D being, I'll give you a second to guess. Tick, 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 tick. I'll give you a second. It was Azah. Azah voted to get rid of Big D instead of Brittany. She couldn't find it within herself to allow Brittany to go home on a unanimous decision. She couldn't find it within herself to vote out Brittany, and she really, really struggled with Brittany going home. I think they really developed a connection in this house. And to be honest with you, that is a difficult moment in this game when you have such a big alliance, the Cookout Alliance, yet you're all building these relationships and these alliances outside of the main alliance. Just like Sarah Beth and Kylan. For Kylan to stay true to the cookout, he is one day going to have to vote out Sarah Beth. For Tiffany to survive in this game and stay true to the cookout, she's going to have to get rid of Claire. This was the chance for them to send Brittany home. Azah was not buying into voting out Brittany. She couldn't do it. And she had a great relationship with Brittany. And that's what it came down to. She had a great relationship with Brittany, and she just could not find it within. And it's difficult. It's difficult. You build these alliances. You build these friendships. You build these relationships in some situations, and you end up having to turn on each other and remember it's still a game. So the whole eviction happens. Brittany ends up going home, 7-1 vote. Azah votes out Big D again. And I think Big D was stunned. He didn't move from the chair. He was trying to figure out, I think, who that one vote was against him, which I think is another quirky thing in Big Brother, that people are so concerned of the votes against them when they're safe in the house. They don't give it time to settle and just, enjoy being safe. They go right into panic mode. Who voted against me? Who wants me out of this house? Who's public enemy number one? That's what it goes into. So one last thing about the voting. I think this cast is a little bit soft in the stance of they are afraid to make the big moves right now. I mean, we were in a situation where you had Alyssa, you had Claire, you had Derek X. You could have made at least some sort of move to try and get rid of Derek F, Big D, and you had Sarah Beth, excuse me. So you had 4 non-cookout members that were voting against 4 cookout members. And instead of doing that 4-4 vote and drawing a line in the sand to get rid of Big D because that's what you thought was best for your game, you then weigh the fact that staying with the house is best for your game. And I don't know how I feel about that, to be honest. I think I'd rather see players vote with their heart and vote with their intuition as to what's best for their game. I think there's discussions that happen before the vote that kind of allow house guests to figure out exactly how the vote's going to lie and how it's going to fall, and to not draw lines in the sand. They all end up voting the majority. I don't think Azah is going to get any backlash on this vote for voting out Big D instead of Brittany, because everyone knows how big of a friend she was to Brittany. I don't think anyone's ever going to give Azah slack for that. I don't think Big D's going to come to Azah and be like, what, are we not cool? What's going on? I think Big D understood. I also think Big D was probably told by Azah beforehand that would be happening beforehand. That way he wasn't taken by surprise. So This all goes down. We get done with the eviction ceremony, and Brittany goes home. Obviously, Julie Chen Moonves can't really reveal to her all the alliances in the house. She's still on the jury. She still has a vote for $750,000 to take care of. She's the first jury member. We're down to 10 people in the house. She sees the goodbye messages, and it's an emotional moment because Brittany felt like she was getting picked on in the entire house, and it's difficult to see a house guest feel that way because you'd like to think everyone in the house feels that love, feels that support from everyone else, but she kept getting bashed. She kept getting picked. In fact, she even said to Kylan on the way out the door, "I'm honored to be a part of both your HOHs," meaning Kylan put her up the first time he was HOH, and now she was evicted on the second time he was HOH. So a difficult moment there. It's always going to be difficult, but she said it in her goodbyes to Julie, or she said it when she went out to talk to Julie. She said, it's a game. I don't hold grudges. It's a game. It was a blessing to be here. It was an honor to be here. I had a lot of fun being here. And she said, someone like me is not supposed to be in this situation, but she got the opportunity to do it. And, kudos to her for staying in as long as she has, being the sixth member voted out of the cast and now first member of the jury. So it's going to be interesting to see where her allegiances fall moving forward with any potential voting for the $750,000. So she gets out of the house. There's 10 people left. Kylan can now not compete in the head of household competition, meaning there are 9 competitors in the dash to dinner competition, which was the head of household competition. And this is one of those time-based speed competitions, which are a lot of fun because I think a lot of people have an opportunity to win this. And it's not necessarily about body size. It's not necessarily about being strong. It's not necessarily about being, big or thin or whatever your body dimensions are. Everyone has an opportunity at these types of challenges because it's about the finesse that you're able to put forth in the competition. So this was a fun competition to watch. They had to start in one area of the backyard and get to the other area of the backyard, which was an Italian restaurant. They had to walk down these balance beams. They had to go different routes. They had to find the fastest route to go. And ironically enough, for the most part, they all chose the same route. I don't know if it was planned that way. They all choose the same route. They all go the same way. And Claire goes first. She ends up not making it in time. I think she had like 37 seconds or 30-something seconds. And long story short, a few people fall here and there. Alyssa was very close to winning, had 27 seconds and fell at the last second. Her foot grazed the ground, barely grazed the ground. She would have been the standing winner at that point. But then Sarah Beth comes along and just tiptoes her way to the end. 21 seconds. Absolutely kills this competition. Derek X was about a half second short of beating her. He was flying towards the end of the competition. He is a beast. He is a comp beast. He fell off at the very beginning of the challenge, and he still found a way to almost win it. Sarah Beth wins HOH with a time of 21.03, I believe it was, and now things get tricky because in my opinion, this Cookout Alliance is a lock for Final 6. There is no way this Cookout Alliance does not make it to Final 6 at this point, because here's the deal. There's 10 people left. First of all, Kylan has Sarah Beth in his back pocket. Sarah Beth has a mind of her own. She can think for herself. She's done it in the past. She spoke against the Alliance when it was the Royal Flush. She's done all that great stuff, but I think Kylan is going to get into her ear at the benefit of the Cookout. So let's see how Sarah Beth handles this HOH. I think it's going to be a very interesting HOH because with 10 people remaining, 6 of whom are on the Cookout Alliance, 4 of whom are non-Cookout. They didn't get invited to the Cookout. They get no burgers. They get no hot dogs. Non-Cookout. 4 remaining. That's Alyssa, Sarah Beth, Claire, and Derek X. They'll never have the numbers, at least at this point, with 10 remaining. They will not have the numbers because here's the deal. With Sarah Beth, head of household, there's now 9 potential people for the block. You put 2 people up, let's just say it's Derek F. and Kylan, the Cookout still has 4 votes to 3. No matter which way you slice it, it's always going to be 4 votes from the Cookout, 3 votes from the non-Cookout because Sarah Beth is the head of household. So there is no chance at all for any Cookout members to go home, except in the instance that one of the high roller room games is won. Anything tricky like that can happen. I say no chance because I don't see it happening. Big Brother, expect the unexpected. That's what we're sitting here waiting for. Realistically, from a number standpoint, even if someone becomes head of household and overthrows Sarah Beth or something down the road like that happening, a random nominee getting on the board from the nominee roulette game that's in the Big Brothers, the high rollers room. Realistically speaking, there's no chance for any of the cookout to go home. So the 6 cookout members are going to make it to the final 6. And I think it's going to be a really funny instance when people sitting in the jury house look back at it and say, wow, this alliance was happening the whole time right around us and none of us identified it. We'll see if anything starts to trickle out as it gets less and less people and those 6 stay together. I think more people outside of the cookout have a chance to actually see the cookout forming or has formed, and it'll click in their head. How could we not have seen this from the beginning with so many moves that have been made, with Tiffany and Hannah not listening to us when we came to her about talking about Big D going out? I think the Cookout Alliance is going to be exposed, but it's going to be too late. And then we get down to 6 with those final 6 members of the Cookout. It's going to be Kyland. It's going to be Derek F. It's going to be Tiffany. You have Alyssa, or not Alyssa, excuse me. You have Hannah. Let me see who else you have here. You have Azza, and then the 6th would be Xavier. So those 6 should make it. And then it's going to be a fun battle between those 6. This could be one of those heavy end-loaded seasons where the ending is just a bloodbath, because once those 6 are left, they got to start turning on each other. Once the cookout is the only thing remaining, a little rain has to happen on the cookout, and it's going to be interesting to watch. It's going to be interesting to see. Last note, the whole Derek X not being a target this week, going into the head of household competition, Xavier and Kylan tried to talk to Derek X about throwing the competition to Xavier to win. Kylan mentioned he couldn't compete. Xavier mentioned, I'm going to keep you and Hannah safe this week. You two are together. You two are not going home. And what ended up happening was Derek X went and talked with Hannah and Claire, I want to say it was, and said, Xavier mentioned I'm safe. Xavier mentioned that he's not going to put me up. They realized, there's a difference between being put up as a nominee and being backdoored. Derek X, did not want to take any chances. As much as he wanted to be in that alliance of 3 with them, he recognizes that all 3 of them are the biggest competitors in this game as far as competitions go. He has to try his best at every competition moving forward as his alliance begins to dwindle. Derek X came out on all cylinders, firing on all cylinders, and had a chance to win the head of household competition. It would have been interesting to see how that unfolded, but you hear it here now. You hear it here first. The cookout is immune to going home at this point, based on the numbers remaining in this game. So let's get into the future of this game. We've talked about it a lot. Sarah Beth is now the HOH. Kylan in her back pocket. Who are her nominees going to be? Kylan could come to Sarah Beth and say, Derek X needs to go home. This is your opportunity to get him out. Again, that helps the cookout. So let's see what Sarah Beth does with that. Is there anyone in the house she maybe doesn't see eye to eye with? She's had some tough love with Tiffany in the past. There's been some issues there with the Royal Flush with Tiffany. They don't like each other a little bit. So we'll see who she targets based on what Kylan tells her. I'm not sure what direction this is going to go, but I can tell you this. It's going to be a fun week 7 of Big Brother. Episode 20, 21, and 22 coming up August 22nd, 25th, and 26th. And I promise you, Reality Pop Nation, I will be here on time next week on Thursday. You will not have to worry about it. I will be here for you to bring you the week 7 recap of Big Brother on the Block. So I'm really looking forward to that, and I'm looking forward to you tuning back in. Be sure to subscribe down low. Be sure to like this video, comment. We'd love to hear your thoughts. And if you're into sports, go check out the Poogie Podcast. Again, I'm Poogie. I run the sports podcast, the Poogie Podcast. If you're into sports, go check that out. We do a lot of sports content on the Poogie Podcast. Would love your support on that channel as well. But for now, go enjoy the rest of your week. Go enjoy your weekend and get ready for Sunday, because I think fireworks are about to start in the Big Brother house. But most importantly, go make this world a better place and take care.